Imagine waking up one morning with a strange black lump under your arm. By evening, you have a fever. By the next day, you are vomiting blood. And within 72 hours, you're dead. This was not a horror movie. This was real life for millions of people in the 14th century. The Black Death was not just a disease. It was the single most devastating event in human history. It wiped out nearly half of Europe's entire population in just 5 years. It changed religion, politics, science, and the very way humans think about death. But here is what most people don't know. The real story of the Black Death is far darker, far more mysterious, and far more shocking than anything you have ever been taught in school. Stay with me, because today we are going back to 1347, and you will never look at history the same way again. Most people think the Black Death started in Europe, but the truth is it began thousands of miles away, deep in the heart of Central Asia, somewhere around modern-day Kyrgyzstan and China, as early as 1338. Archaeological evidence discovered in the 1800s near Lake Issyk-Kul in Kyrgyzstan revealed gravestones from 1338 and 1339 with inscriptions mentioning a mysterious, deadly pestilence. Scientists who later examined the DNA from these graves confirmed this was the Black Death. Ground Zero. The disease was caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, carried primarily by fleas that lived on black rats. And rats, as you know, loved one thing above everything else: human trade routes. The Silk Road, the ancient highway of commerce connecting China to Europe, became the highway of death. As merchants, soldiers, and travelers moved west, the fleas and rats moved with them. By 1346, the plague had reached the Crimean Peninsula on the northern coast of the Black Sea. And this is where history takes one of its darkest turns. In 1346, a Mongol army was laying siege to the city of Kaffa, a Crimean trading port controlled by Genoese merchants from Italy. The siege was going nowhere. But then the plague struck the Mongol camp. Soldiers began dying by the thousands, their bodies turning black, bleeding from every opening. The Mongol commander, rather than retreating, made a decision that would change the course of human history. He ordered his soldiers to load the dead plague-ridden corpses onto their catapults and fling them over the walls of Kaffa, directly into the city. This was arguably the world's first biological weapon attack. The people inside Kaffa were horrified. They tried throwing the bodies into the sea as fast as they could, but it was too late. The plague had entered the city. The Genoese merchants, desperate to escape, boarded their ships and fled west, back toward Italy. They thought they were escaping the plague. In reality, they were carrying it with them. In October 1347, 12 Genoese trading ships docked at the port of Messina in Sicily. When the port authorities went to greet the sailors, they found something horrifying. Most of the sailors were dead. Those still alive were covered in strange black boils, oozing blood and pus, the size of eggs, growing from their armpits and groins. They were bleeding from their eyes. Their skin had turned dark and rotting while they were still alive. The port authorities immediately ordered the ships out of the harbor, but it was already too late. The Black Death had arrived in Europe. Within weeks, it spread from Sicily to mainland Italy. Within months, it had reached France, Spain, England, and Germany. Within 2 years, it had consumed the entire continent. The speed at which it moved was terrifying. There were 3 forms of the plague, and each one was more deadly than the last. The first was bubonic plague, the most common form. The bacteria would infect the lymph nodes, causing those horrifying black swellings called buboes. Survival rate, about 30 to 60% with no treatment. The second was septicemic plague, where the bacteria entered directly into the bloodstream. The skin would turn black and die while the person was still alive. Internal bleeding everywhere. Survival rate, nearly 0%. The third was the most terrifying of all, pneumonic plague. This version attacked the lungs and spread through the air itself, just by breathing near an infected person. It killed within 24 to 48 hours. Survival rate without treatment, also effectively 0. People in medieval Europe had absolutely no understanding of bacteria or germ theory. They had no antibiotics, no hospitals in any modern sense, no way to protect themselves. They were completely defenseless against something they couldn't even see. The reaction across Europe was one of complete and total panic. Cities became ghost towns overnight. Entire villages were abandoned. Families left their sick members to die alone.
Don't leave me.
Because the moment someone showed symptoms, everyone near them knew they had only days to live. Priests refused to give last rites to the dying, terrified of infection. Doctors wore bizarre bird-beak masks stuffed with herbs, believing the plague was carried by bad air. Merchants refused to open shops. Courts shut down. Governments collapsed. In Florence, Italy, one of the greatest cities in Europe at the time, 60,000 out of 90,000 people died within months. Writer Giovanni Boccaccio, who survived, described bodies piling up in the streets faster than people could bury them. Neighbors dragged corpses to their doorsteps just to get them out of their homes. The smell of death was everywhere, permanently, for years. But the reaction that shocked historians the most, what people did when they realized the plague showed no mercy to anyone, not even the church. In medieval Europe, the Catholic Church was not just a religious institution. It was the center of all life, political, social, moral, and economic. People believed completely that if they lived a righteous life, God would protect them. But the plague killed priests just as fast as it killed sinners. It killed bishops. It killed monks. It filled churches with corpses. People began to ask a question that had never been asked before in medieval Europe. If God exists, why is he letting this happen? The church had no good answer. Many people abandoned the church entirely. Others went to the opposite extreme and joined fanatical movements. The most disturbing were the flagellants, groups of men who traveled from town to town, whipping themselves bloody in public, believing that by punishing their own flesh, they could appease God's anger. The church, which had dominated European life for nearly 1,000 years, never fully recovered its authority after the Black Death. Many historians argue that the seeds of the Protestant Reformation, which came 200 years later, were planted in the doubt created by the plague. When people don't understand something, they look for someone to blame. And in 14th century Europe, Jewish communities became the target. Rumors spread that Jewish people had caused the plague by poisoning the wells. There was zero evidence for this. In fact, Jewish communities were dying from the plague at similar rates. But fear and hatred don't require evidence. Across Germany, France, and Switzerland, Jewish communities were massacred. Entire towns were burned. In Strasbourg in 1349, around 2,000 Jewish people were burned alive in their own cemetery before the plague had even reached the city, simply out of fear and hatred. Pope Clement VI actually issued 2 papal bulls declaring Jewish people were not responsible and condemning the violence. But it made little difference. This period of persecution is one of the darkest chapters within an already dark era, a reminder of how quickly humanity turns on itself in moments of fear. So how many people actually died? In Europe alone, the Black Death killed an estimated 25 million people, roughly 1/3 to 1/2 of the entire European population, in just 5 years between 1347 and 1352. Globally, including Central Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa, historians estimate the total death toll between 75 million and 200 million people. To put that in perspective, the entire human population of Earth at that time was only around 400 million. The Black Death may have wiped out nearly half of all humans alive on the planet. Some regions were hit even harder than others. Parts of Italy, France, and England lost 60 to 70% of their population. Entire bloodlines simply ceased to exist. Villages were erased from maps. Fields went unfarmed for decades. Some historians estimate it took 200 years for Europe's population to return to pre-plague levels. Here's the part that will surprise you. The Black Death, as catastrophic as it was, accidentally triggered some of the most important transformations in human history. With so many people dead, labor became scarce. Peasants and workers, who had previously been treated as little better than slaves under the feudal system, suddenly had enormous power. They could demand higher wages. They could leave bad landlords. For the first time in centuries, the ordinary working person had leverage. This accelerated the collapse of feudalism across Europe and laid the groundwork for the rise of the middle class. The plague also forced Europe to take medicine seriously for the first time. The complete failure of traditional medicine pushed scholars to actually start observing, questioning, and experimenting. Early steps toward the scientific revolution. Art was transformed too. Before the plague, European art was stiff, formal, and religious. After the plague, having seen so much raw human suffering, artists began depicting real human emotion for the first time. This shift is considered one of the catalysts of the Renaissance. And perhaps most significantly, the Church's loss of authority created space for free thinking, questioning, and intellectual exploration that had been suppressed for centuries. Death, in its most horrifying form, accidentally gave birth to the modern world. The Black Death was not just a plague, it was a mirror, showing humanity at its absolute worst and, occasionally, at something approaching its best. It showed us how quickly civilization can unravel, how fear turns neighbors into enemies, how institutions we think are permanent can collapse almost overnight. But it also showed us resilience, rebuilding, questioning, creating. The world that came out of the Black Death was unrecognizable from the one that entered it. And in many ways, the world you and I live in today was shaped by those 5 terrible years in the 14th century. If this video made you see history differently, give it a like and share it with someone who loves history. And subscribe to History Tales Lab, because we are just getting started. The next story is even darker, and you won't want to miss it.